Hi, folks. I have the pleasure and privilege to be joined by Andrew Klavan of the Daily Wire fame and also the author of A Strange Habit of Mind, a book that's going to be coming out shortly. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be here.
Honestly, right? So before we start, I've got to tell you a little bit of a story. So a few years ago, say back in, 2016, 2017, I considered myself a lot more left-wing than I consider myself now. And I thought, okay, well, I wanted to be kind of center-left, right? So I thought, okay, I'm going to have to start watching something from the right, because otherwise I'm just going to get sucked into this left-wing vortex and I'll end up kind of losing track of where I am. And so I ended up watching some of the hosts from the Daily Wire, yourself and Michael Knowles primarily, because I found you guys the most entertaining. Ben Shapiro is useful, and I thought it was most useful when talking about Trump, actually, because you can tell that Ben doesn't really like Trump, but he also doesn't like the left. So you got a good assessment. But Michael Knowles, when he was going around the university campuses, was hilarious, just because of the sheer radiant joy in his face. But it was really your monologues at the beginning of your podcast that I found genuinely hilarious and got me watching a bunch of your podcasts and got me kind of dragged more towards the right. So everything that's happened since then, I put essentially on your shoulders.
You're blaming me, yeah.
So, but honestly, genuinely pleased to have you on. And I was just hoping to pick your brain, basically. So where to begin? I suppose I'll start with a big one, actually. What's your perspective on the current state of not only the United States, but the sort of West in general? How do you see the lay of the land?
Well, we're in a crisis mode, but it's almost an inevitable crisis. I mean, so many things are ending at once. The post-World War II era is ending. The Reagan era is ending. And my generation, the baby boom generation, is dying. I'm sort of hoping they can die without taking me with them. But, I think this is a major, major moment. On top of which, I think the internet has changed everything. And I think that we really have not yet assessed and incorporated and processed the amount of change the internet has brought with us. It really is like the printing press. And people talk about the printing press as if it were some kind of delightful innovation, which of course it was, but it also led to the Reformation, the 30 Years' War, some of the greatest bloodshed in the history of humankind. And I think that this democratization of information has also done exactly the same thing. It's brought the powers that be, just like the printing press, brought the church down on people who wanted reform. The internet has brought the powers that be down on the rest of us to keep us from sharing what they call misinformation, what we call information with one another that has not gone through the filter of the clerisy. So all of this is creating a crisis on the left, a crisis of faith, a crisis of where we stand in position to faith, and a crisis in how we're going to manage our communications with one another. It's frightening. But it's not necessarily the toll of doom. It may, in fact, just be the birth of a new and even better and more exciting era in the West.
Well, you're a lot more optimistic than I am. So I think it's very interesting that you compare the internet to the printing press, because I agree with you. I think it's obviously the same sort of phenomenon. Yeah. But I think there is a difference here, isn't there? Because the printing press wasn't addictive. It wasn't something that one could find themselves constantly on the thing, publishing a new thing. Whereas now, for example, with Twitter and Instagram and any other social media, it wasn't terribly dangerous for a child to get a newspaper. But I'm rather thinking that it's probably a bit dangerous for them to have social media. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's really smart, because what it really is it's the printing press and the Industrial Revolution put together. And the Industrial Revolution, another thing that we kind of forget about, just decimated the way people lived. It took away family life. It ended the domination of agricultural life. It destroyed the home industries of women. That's when feminism rises, because women have lost their economic power. The clothes they make, the food they grow, the fields they tend, all of that goes over to the factories. Even the children they create go off into the city to work in the factories and become less valuable to the family itself and more the property of society. So this is kind of that too. It's wrapped into that. This is a thing that actually can dominate the way we relate to one another, even as it makes it possible for you and I to talk to one another. So, so obviously this is something that's it's going to have to be regulated. And of course, the people who have the power to regulate it are the last people we should trust to regulate it, because they're the ones who want to close off anybody who says, these guys are a bunch of decadent, degenerate clowns, which they obviously are. And so we're going to have to find ways, in the same way we regulated factories and said, no, you can't take a 7-year-old off the 8-year-old off to the blacking factory and not have them come home. You have to make laws about that. We're going to also have to make laws that say, no, just because you run a site like Twitter doesn't mean you can knock the president of the United States off a communication vehicle. It's absolutely absurd. I think that's already on the way, but it obviously is going to be a fight every step of the way, because again, the people who have the power to regulate are the last people we want to see regulating information. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a double whammy.
But you are right, though, isn't it? On the point of it will be regulated either way, because I think a lot of people, myself included, had, and going back about 7 or 8 years, quite naive views of social media, because it was only in sort of 2006 to 2009 that social media started becoming a thing. And then about 4 or 5 years after that, YouTube started actually gaining sort of a political space, and people realized, oh, actually, I can talk to quite a large number of people by just uploading a video of myself. And it wasn't very long after that that the Wild West became a very controlled West, wasn't it? And so I was definitely trapped in the, well, why can't we just, this will just carry on like this forever? No, it was naive to think that. And so this is one of the major problems, I think, with conservatism, is that it's kind of intertwined with libertarianism in a way, right? And it's difficult to try and persuade the libertarians that actually someone's going to establish some rules. And so it'd be better if it was us rather than them, right?
Yeah, libertarianism, I think, is kind of a childish philosophy. I mean, I always like the libertarians I know, because they're like, I'm an artist. I've been living with eccentrics and weirdos my whole life, and I love them, and they're kind of part of my cohort. But no, every single relationship in human experience is regulated, every single one. So you and I can have a conversation, but if I suddenly leap across the table and start strangling you, no, that's against the law. That's out of bounds. Everything is regulated. People are out of control. They don't know how to behave. We need laws. And so I'm not afraid of regulation. I'm just afraid of over-regulation. I'm afraid of the people who do the regulating, as we should be. Anybody with power should be a source of fear and suspicion to us at all times. So that's the thing the libertarians get right. They understand that just because the nice policeman is your friend, it doesn't mean he can't be abusive, and just because the lawmaker wears a tie and jacket doesn't mean he's not a complete fascistic jerk. This is the thing the libertarians get right. They do a service warning us about that stuff. But you can go too far, and especially in this matter of social media. These guys, they act as if they keep talking about the free speech rights of Twitter and the free speech rights of Facebook. Not at all. These are multinational corporations with more money than 2/3 of the nations on earth, right? They are not, this is not the corner store that has the right to sell Playboy. These are guys who, by shutting people down, can essentially eliminate their right to free speech. In the US, we have the First Amendment, and the First Amendment protects us from the government stopping our free speech. But the government is also taxed with defending our rights, one of which is free speech. And so if Twitter, Facebook, YouTube become a threat to free speech, the government is empowered to stop that threat. And that's what we have to get them to do.
Yeah. And I'm a very strong admirer of the American Constitution. I think that the Founding Fathers did a very good job of creating something that has endured for a long time. 250 years for a republic is a long time. But the world has changed a lot, and I think that the consideration of corporations as people, so now Twitter as an individual, as a sort of corporate person, has free speech rights. I think that's actually the wrong direction. Now, I don't blame the Founding Fathers for not having presaged this. 100 years ago, 50 years ago, no one would have figured out that Twitter would have been deplatforming the President of the United States. It was just, the idea would have just been ludicrous that a private company could censor a president. But we are here and we are now. And so we have to be realistic about the position we're in, right? It's not wrong for conservatives to say, no, actually, we would like things done the way we want them, actually.
It's funny. If you read the Federalist Papers, which are the great
I have, yeah.
defense of the Constitution, these guys are such geniuses that you actually reel with admiration when you read it. But it becomes very clear that they could not foresee not just the internet, but even television, because they kept depending on local loyalties, which were basically erased by these devices that make us connect the way we're connecting right now. That is the problem. When you read the Federalist Papers, it's so clear that they could not see that. I believe the principles that they were defending can still be defended. I believe that many of the mechanisms that they put forward can be updated, but they do have to be updated for this new world. I always talk about, I was very briefly embedded with the troops in Afghanistan, and I was lying in a tent at midnight with all these soldiers, and my cell phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was a guy in Hollywood asking me about my opinion of his script. And I was like, I can't talk to you right now. I'm in Afghanistan, and so we're going to live in a global world, but it's going to be a real question of how we approach that new challenge that obviously the founders couldn't foresee.
So how is it you think the Conservatives can muster the moral courage to demand that certain rules are in place for others? Because one thing I've noticed is it's very easy to criticize, right? It's very easy to say, look at that rule that you've imposed. I can see a flaw with that rule because once it's imposed, it manifests itself and I can identify what's gone wrong with it. It's much more difficult to find a set of rules to impose that will be fair to as many people as possible. And I think Conservatives have become very nervous about doing that because I think in the late 90s, early 2000s, the left was very effective at pointing out the flaws in the rules. So how can Conservatives overcome these sort of the position that they're in?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And what the left did very cleverly was they used our own principles against us. So we believe in free speech. So they said, well, why then, if you believe in free speech, why can't I set the flag on fire? Why can't I curse in your face? Why can't we sell pornography to children? All of these things that really should have been limited. Everything has limits. But the minute you say that, you're opening the door to people who want to limit your rights to speak at all. I think the conservatives need two things. Conservatives tend to be reactionary. It is one of their big weaknesses. They tend to define themselves in opposition to the changes that are coming down the pike. And listen, sometimes the changes are right. I'm in favor of a more tolerant world. I'm in favor of a multi-ethnic country. I don't believe all countries have to be multi-ethnic. I'm in favor of a multi-ethnic America. I mean, America was not set up to be an ethnic country like other countries that are named after the people who founded them. We're not. But I think that the thing that conservatives have to do is we have to have a positive vision of what it is we're defending. And if you have that positive vision, it then becomes possible to divide those things that can be regulated by government and from those things that have to be installed in culture. All of our founding fathers said the Constitution is a document. John Adams said it most directly, but they all said the Constitution is a document for a moral and religious people. We are no longer a moral or religious people. And so that raises the question of whether A, we have to get rid of the Constitution, or B, we have to restore our moral and religious senses. Now, I'm in favor of the latter. I believe that I'm a religious person. I believe that religion, the atheism that grew up with the scientific revolution is outdated. I believe the science has outstripped what they thought it was going to be and is really much more weird and spiritual than we thought it was. And so I think that, yes, we can invent we can see our religion through a new lens, a 21st and 22nd century lens. But those are fights you have to wage on the cultural side. You can't come down. I mean, there's a movement here, probably there too, Catholic integralism, where they basically want to bring back the Pope and have like this kind of religious order above the state order. And no, I don't believe that. I believe that you have to choose religion. I believe it is that our religion, specifically Christianity, is built for choice. But we're going to have to fight that cultural battle. And to fight that cultural battle, you have to build a culture. You can't keep whining about what Hollywood is doing without building your own Hollywood. You can't keep whining about the books that are being written and the books that aren't being allowed to get published without publishing your own books. This is something that the thinkers on the right have really not done well. The artists are here. We have the artists on the right. There are many, many talented, able people on the right. What we don't have is the millionaires and billionaires willing to invest their money in the crazy investment of movies and books and art and music. And there's just a lot of philistinism on the right because of that. So I think, look, I think this is a dual battle. I think it's a political battle to set the rules. How do we defend our free speech rights? How do we defend our freedom of choice, our freedom of the way we live? And a cultural battle. And how do we say, it is better to live this way, even for instance, like me, if you're tolerant, highly tolerant of sexual insanity, like I said, I'm an artist. I've been around, if it weren't for gay people, I wouldn't be able to make a living, in the arts. Even though I'm highly tolerant of the different ways people live, I do believe the core of human life is the male-female family, and that core deserves to be treated like the core. It deserves to be treated in a hierarchy as the model of all other relationships. And so I think that we have to really think about how we put forward a tolerant and open society based on the best and the center of what society has to offer. It's a big ask, but I think we can do it, and we have decades to do it. The left has spent decades tearing it all apart, so it's going to take a long time to put it back together.
And this is actually why I keep telling people this is not a short-term project that we're proposing here.
Yeah,
and I've been thinking about this quite a lot because I read Michael Knowles' book actually, which I thought was actually very, very good.
Yes,
there are lots of like influencer books, should we call them, where it's online influencers talking about the culture wars, and I've read a bunch of them, and I could have written one myself, but actually Michael had written the book I would have written, just with a few more references to God than I would have done. Not that I'm proud of being an atheist, it's just that's the way I am. But it was an excellent book, and he made a very, very strong point, I thought, in the fact that, look, it's very evident that the left's virtues are what we consider to be vices, and what we consider to be vices are all a series of virtues to them. And so it's very difficult. It puts the conservative, I think, at a significant disadvantage, because what the conservative promises is prosperity and satisfaction. He is promising a long, overarching goal that is not going to be immediately realized. And so it requires a certain barrier to entry, a certain disposition to be able to really comprehend and say, oh no, actually, if I put in 10 years work now, then at the end of that, I actually have a wonderful life. I have a wife, I have children, I have a house, I have a business. And that, I mean, to me, phenomenally appealing prospect. But I do also personally know a bunch of people to whom, I mean, that's not even slightly appealing. And so actually free government handouts and the ability to smoke marijuana on every street corner and to be bailed out of every bad decision you ever make and never really take responsibility for yourself. I'm worried that, and have that lionize as a virtue in and of itself, gluttony, sloth, envy, greed, all of these things. It's not that I agree with it, but I can see that a lot of people find it kind of irresistible. And I'm worried about that kind of, like we're trying to catch water between our hands, and we might have a small amount left on our palms, but you see what I'm saying, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we have to make positive moral arguments. Frederick Bastiat, the economist, points out that if it's wrong for me to steal your money, personally, it's just as wrong for the government to steal somebody else's money and give it to another person. And what they do is they have this really strange argument, which is, yes, but you have so much. I don't understand why at some point my so much becomes yours. I don't understand why that happens. You transform charity, which is ennobling both to the giver and the receiver in a strange way. You transform that into robbery, essentially. Why am I taking money from Jeff Bezos and giving it to someone else, no matter how much money Jeff Bezos has? I mean, I keep hearing Joe Biden in that creepy whisper he has saying you have to pay your fair share. You have to pay your fair share. My two questions of that: one is fair share of what? Because most of the things you do are absolutely absurd and useless and destructive. So that's the first thing. But the other is Thomas Sowell's point: is what is my fair share of someone else's money? It is zero. My fair share of Jeff Bezos's money is zero. Obviously, it helps if Jeff Bezos doesn't treat his workers like garbage, which he sometimes does.
I'm fine with regulation that prevents him from doing that. That's
exactly.
Regulate the hell out of Amazon.
That's right. That is exactly right. He has to be made to treat people like human beings. This is the other problem with libertarianism. We cannot let the powerful destroy the weak. That's not the way we're built, and it's not what we're here for. But once that's in place, the guy has the right to all the money in the world if he can make it. And so I just think that that's the argument that we're making, and we're afraid to make it. We're always afraid to make it because they cast us as plutocrats. The funny thing is, in America, at least, the right conservatives give far more money to charity than the left wing does at every level, because we believe that is ennobling to us. And the thing you said before about people working for 10 years and then building a good life, our point is that working is actually in and of itself rewarding. Of course, it feels better to sit around and eat cake and smoke dope, but working is in fact more rewarding and more ennobling and more human. A lot of these things, I feel there is room for regulation. One of the points Knowles makes is that politics, we always say that politics is downstream from culture, but sometimes culture is downstream from politics. And there's nothing wrong with saying, if you want, what's the line in Kipling? If you don't work, you starve. I think that is the way he puts it. But it's like that you have to work to make your living. You're not.
I think Lenin said the same thing, actually.
It's just an iron rule of life. You have to work. Nobody owes you anything. I don't owe you anything. Nobody owes you a thing. And that's really the problem that people don't point out enough about the left, is how mandatory they make everything. They say whatever isn't forbidden is mandatory. So it's not charity. It's not generosity to steal my money. It is not charity to give you money. That they call it an entitlement. You're not entitled to it. And those are moral arguments that we have to start making fearlessly. I think that the domination of the culture at every level by the left has been our biggest enemy and our weakest point, and they've used it brilliantly.
They've been immensely aggressive in every realm. But I agree with that argument. I mean, it's very much the argument my dad made to me when I was young, and I was raised with it, and I completely have internalized it. I agree with it. But I'm just thinking, okay, so if I was a 20-year-old now and no one had ever actually made that argument to me, what would I be thinking if someone did make that argument? And I would probably be thinking, well, hang on a second. The government is literally printing trillions of dollars in America, billions of pounds over here, and they are literally giving it away to whoever. They're giving it to Zelensky, they're giving it to, California's giving it for drugs and the homeless. Like the connection between my taxes or your taxes and the money that's printed seems to have become diffuse. And so I hate to say that it feels that this has become a bit of an archaic argument that doesn't really connect with people anymore. And I think it's hard to pin down, especially when you look at the levels of debt and the levels of spending we have. Right. So it feels like a small town America argument. Right. And I very much agree with that, but I think that the way of looking at it has lost its impact. And so I've been thinking that conservatives maybe need to make another approach. But I mean, I'm not saying I have the better approach. I'm just looking at the way that the young people are now. And I just think we've allowed the left to raise them, frankly.
Yeah, I know. I agree with that. But I think that the argument is still good. It is the power of the way we make it and the way we make it. Because, one of the things that there's this real Catholic movement on the right here. I don't know if you have this, but
we don't have it here. But I follow the American one because I'm interested in American politics.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and one of the ways that I agree with it is the idea. What do they call it? The Benedict option, where you basically say we are going to build our lives like this, and we're going to essentially excuse ourselves from the life that you're building. And I think that is actually something that's going to happen here naturally. The best thing we have here is federalism. This idea that the states should have more power. There should be more power as it gets closer to you. So the states have power that the federal government doesn't have. And the left hates this. They hate the idea that people in Arkansas should be allowed to make their own decisions without people in New York telling them what to do. They just absolutely detest this. And
it's the total antithesis of everything about left-wing thought. How could they embrace it?
Yes, that's right. So, I mean, I had to leave California because California, which should be paradise, now looks like a zombie apocalypse. I mean, it genuinely looks like it has been, it looks like Nairobi. I mean, when I was in Nairobi many years ago, I thought, oh, we have no poverty like this in America. Now, parts of Los Angeles look exactly like Nairobi. And so, what they do doesn't work. And when you have places that are defended from what they do, you can build a culture that's better than theirs. And so when you have a culture of working people who are not on the dole, of people who actually get married and stay married, of people who worship together and live together in harmony, no matter what colors they are and all this, that is a really good advertisement for your argument. While the government, as you say, is spending money that they don't have, you should be only spending money that you do have, so that you can start to build people who will change that government. Again, it's a long haul to change the culture, and it's why conservatives don't want to do it, because they're always conservatives are very good at panic and despair. They're really good at, like, you pull this thread and the whole suit unravels, therefore I must defend this thread with my whole body. No, what you have to do is you have to make a suit for yourself and wear that suit until people say, gee, I want a suit like that. And I think that that is something we actually are going to have to do for a new world, because we're no longer an agricultural community. We're no longer a community of small towns or a community of cities. I think, again, I'm actually quite hopeful about this, because what they do simply doesn't work, and economies that are based on debt collapse. I just would like to see us transform things before the collapse comes.
Well, that would be lovely, but I'm not very optimistic. I mean,
well, it's a 50-50 shot, I think, at this point. Yeah.
But so I do think that you're on something here. Like I think the right does need to be more introspective about what it thinks a positive vision should be, right? As in, because and one of the things I think the problem the right has, and I say this as someone who's like come to the right from an outside perspective, right? Because a lot of people on the right have been born and bred into this way of thinking and philosophy.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was when I was young, because my dad was very conservative, but I didn't really think about it, And so I went off to university like many young people did, came out with a bunch of left-wing ideas, and never really thought about them too hard either, because I just wasn't very interested in politics. And then started going, well, hang on a second. What do I actually think? Oh no, all of this is nonsense. So I feel like I'm kind of an outsider that's come to the party, and I'm like, right, okay, what is it then? And the right seems to actually not have a very good elevator pitch, right? It doesn't, it's actually like, oh, well, if you do a lot of things for a very long time, then actually you get what I've got. It's like, okay, but you need to, like, the left has got a manifesto, the left has got one page of this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to win. And I'm not even thinking this is even necessarily possible for the right? If you're going to, you can't just inculcate someone into a tradition with a single page of text. But I do think the right needs ways of explaining to young men, especially, and I think primarily because I think once the young men start doing something productive, the women will follow, because they're going to naturally want an upwardly facing man. But getting young men to actually take themselves seriously, I think, is the primary thing the right needs to do. And I'm not saying I have the way to do it either, but it's very concerning to me, how like all of the institutions and the culture and just the young men I see are very unserious people. And I was when I was their age, and I was never encouraged not to be. What do you make of that?
Well, there's so much in it that it's hard to. I have to pick a place to start an answer.
Feel free. Yeah, I know. I was going a bit there.
No, it's not that. It is a big problem. One of the reasons the right doesn't have a manifesto like the left does is because our supreme respect for the individual. And the individual is not just a series of desires, of fleshly desires. He is actually an implanted personality. A little hard to explain this to an atheist in some ways, because I think that it actually, there's this movement called Christian atheism with guys like Doug Murray, Love, and all this. I don't think it makes any sense. I think that actually you have to have a belief in something above nature in order to understand that you were made to be a person that you are not. There is no person who does not know that he is not the person he was made to be. Every single human being, adult human being on earth, understands that he has fallen short of who he is supposed to be. There is no person who doesn't know that in his heart of hearts.
Just as a quick aside on that, interestingly, first thing, I think that atheism is something that has been done to me, not something I've been chosen.
Okay.
No, and I think there are a lot of people who do feel this way, actually, because I grew up in the 90s, and so I feel like it's kind of been inflicted on me. But also, actually, I found myself coming around to that sort of position by reading Aristotle, actually. As in, actually, you've got a teleology, and you were born a man, or you've grown into a man. Maybe you should think about that. So it's actually not as alien as you might think on that
Okay.
regard.
Yeah, and I mean, C.S. Lewis is only Christian Aristotle.
Yeah.
That's what he was really good at, was translating Aristotle into Christianity. And I think this is the point, that when the right completely lost its way on this, they started in, especially after the Reagan era, not Reagan's fault, but Reaganists' fault, that they started telling us that capitalism was the be-all and end-all. And it took me a long time talking to right-wingers to explain to them, no, prostitution is capitalism. Selling fentanyl is perfectly good capitalism. There's something above capitalism, which is basically this moral level. And when you speak of a moral level, what you're speaking about is something literally supernatural. You're talking about what nature represents that is above itself. And so if we are not going to talk about that, see, then we have no manifesto whatsoever, because our manifesto is you were made to be something better than what you are right at this minute. And there is a way to get to that. And yes, it's going to look different for you than it does for me. It's going to look different for the bricklayer than it does for the novelist. But still, it is there for every single person. And there are certain rules, like the 10 Commandments, that actually work pretty well in clearing away the debris so that you can then set about the positive thing that only you can do, which is make you yourself. This leads back to what you were talking about good men and women, and whether or not it is good men or good women who have to come first. I think that this is one of the big problems, that is what the church calls complementarity, that we are so linked together, men and women, that there can't be good women without good men, and there can't even be a definition of a good man until you have a good woman that you are actually trying to protect and nurture and bring into the world in the completeness of a single human being and of one flesh. The war on the genders is so important and so worth fighting back. And again, I want to fight it back without being unkind to gay people or anything like that. But I do want to make this point that this is where human beings live. They live at their heart in this relationship between a man and a woman. And it is the thing that brings us to full fruition. I am opposed to feminism. I'm an anti-feminist. And by that, of course, I don't mean that women shouldn't have rights to choose. What I mean is that they have been taught and told that male values are their values, and they're not.
What it means is you're not a communist. That's what it means, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I've been doing this so long now. Yeah. I just look at it as, right, that's a communist attack on the civilization and the family through Gramsci's own formulation. That's how I look at it. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that it used to be when I was young that the conservatives sounded boring because, they're going about the family and the family and the family. And when I was a young man, there was no problem with the family. There was no isolation because of the internet, because you only had a dial-up modem. And so, you couldn't spend all day on the internet because you had to pay the phone bill and someone else would want to use the phone. It just wasn't possible. But now I think actually the conservative position on the family has become incredibly relevant again, actually, because young people now, as you were saying, I agree with you about the complementarian point as well. I think that's a fantastic point. And I was wrong to frame it as in, one or the other. I hear from a lot of young men, and one of the problems they have is, well, there are no good women around. But of course, by the converse, well, look at yourself. You're hardly a catch. And that's what the women are thinking at the same time. And so we have this problem of atomization and isolation with young people who are just not forming families as they should. And it's suddenly making the conservative arguments way stronger. And I like your framing as well as the sort of metaphysical level above the material world. It's like, look, there is something you could have together, that you could sell to young people that is actually magical. It's not just a piece of table, a wooden table or a mug or anything. No, this is something genuinely magical that will enchant your life, that you can carry forward into the future and can blossom. And conservatives need to start really selling this hard, I think, because I think there are loads of desperate and lonely young people who want to hear it.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to hear women now. You're starting to hear these voices here and there of women saying, you know, the sexual revolution has not really worked out well for women, and that's putting it mildly. I think they've just been completely abused by it. But they always say, well, I don't want to go back to the 50s. And you suddenly think, well, wait a minute. First of all, I wasn't quite there in the 50s, but I was there back then. And maybe there are things you don't want from the 50s, but maybe there are things you do, and maybe you should rethink what that actually was, as opposed to what you were told it was. I have one of the fortunate things that I have in my life, not only personally, but as someone who thinks about these things, is I have a remarkable marriage. I have this 42-year marriage that has been an absolute romance. I mean, the point that I always make about it is that my wife and I have literally had one fight 35 years ago, which lasted under a minute. And we have had this kind of romance going on. And one of the experiences that has taken place in the course of that marriage was that you start out with a woman, my wife was incredibly beautiful, and I was turned on, and I thought this was great. And then you start to think, as most men think about women, well, this woman is obviously out of her mind because she's saying things that make no sense. She has the capacity to reason. And then slowly, if you pay attention, you start to realize, oh no, a lot of what she says doesn't fit in with my way of thinking, but is in fact true. And then it's like putting on those red and blue glasses that they give you in 3D movies. Then suddenly you start to see that you have become a bigger person with a full scope of a view of the full world as it actually is, which you couldn't have by yourself. It is only through this complementary relationship that you develop that full thing. And the second thing you learn, and this is really important, is that all this talk about subjectivity, as if it were the same thing as imagination, or as if it were all relative and you think one thing is good and I think another thing is good, is complete crap. I mean, it's complete garbage. We see things that are subjective, that are real or not real. You think you're in love, but you're not. So you were wrong in your subjective judgment. But that means you could be right. I was right in my subjective judgment. I picked up my wife hitchhiking. She literally sat down in my car, and I thought, there she is. That's the one I've been looking for. And I was right. That was a true subjective observation. So really, the whole journey of life is having your subjective world come into collaboration with the objective world. And then you are living a full, rich, and I would say spiritual life. And that only really happens through love. I mean, that's why the Bible is so big on love. Why they keep saying that? Because it is, you find that when your inner life and your outer life are in league with one another, that's the experience that you're actually having, is the experience of love. And so all of these things are so important and so profound and so normal. They're so normal that people have ceased to see them. It's kind of the old ball and chain, and now I'm married. I used to have sex, but now I'm married, and all this kind of the old comedians, all the jokes comedians make, which does happen to a lot of people because they're not paying attention and they're not living at that extra level of life. But we have to sell that extra level of life because it's what we're talking about.
Honestly, right. So I think that what you've just done there is actually the best way of selling it, right? Because often the right definitely falls into the sort of masculine trap of thinking, well, I have logic and reason on my side. And so I will simply make a cast iron logical argument that you will be compelled to agree with. But actually, that's not how persuasion works. And actually, as you were saying, this sort of personal testimonial saying, well, look, I have a 42-year-long marriage that is magical and beautiful, and just expressing how, I can see it in your face, that this is something you truly believe and that you truly get so much out of. And that, I think, is far more persuasive to a young person, or anyone really, to say, well, actually, this is what it did for me. My worldview did for me. And just think about it, and I think the left, this is where the left, I think, recruited best with their sort of testimonial style. Because I remember when, the Huffington Post would first start publishing my experiences as a black woman in tech or something like that, right? And I'd be like, well, that's ridiculous. But that was very persuasive to the audience they were looking for, right? And I honestly, what you were just saying, that I will probably clip that out of this interview and put it on social media, because I think that is something that young people want to hear, and they want to know that it is possible, and they just need to know, okay, what's the foundation I need to build upon to get to that? Because that's a romantic story. It's genuine romance. We don't have to rely on logic, or or browbeating. And getting to the point you made on love, I think this was something I was going to mention a minute ago, but it kind of slipped my mind. The right's messaging should be rooted in compassion, right? The left lies about their compassion always, and they use it as a very, very slippery and clever mask. But I don't get that impression from people on the right. I genuinely believe they have actual compassion for people, and that's what drives them to try and set the rules, right? Because as I was saying about the rules, they're difficult to set, but you want to set good rules because it's not compassionate to leave people rudderless, is it?
No, and you're so right about this idea that we depend on reason and truth. There's that Paul Simon song, "I want some tenderness beneath the honesty."
Yeah. And it's the famous Ben Shapiro quote, right? And don't get me wrong, it was a funny quote, very relevant a few years ago, but actually now,
Well, Ben and I have gone around the corner on this, and even Ben will admit that I've humanized him a little bit. Of course, facts matter, but feelings are what we're here for. As I was listening to you, I was thinking of this politician we had here named Paul Ryan, who wanted to cut entitlements, which is a necessary thing to bring the debt down. We have to do it, but nobody wants to do it because everybody wants the free stuff. And Ryan used to stand in front of a chart with a pointer, and he used to explain how this was working and all this stuff. And so the left made a video in which Paul Ryan pushes an old woman in a wheelchair off a cliff. I thought, well, that's how that's done, So I've been an artist all my life, and I really had to, for 20 years, I've been pounding the left. You've got to pay attention to what people like me do. You have to support it, not just with money, never mind the money. I'll make a living somehow, but you've got to support it with reviews and awards and appreciation. And you can't constantly be saying, oh, there was a nude scene, I must shield my eyes while you're watching Game of Thrones, because we know you're watching Game of Thrones. So, let me tell stories about real life. This has been a very, very hard fought battle. But after 20 years, I can say that when I started making these speeches, they used to look at me as if I had landed, like I was the man who fell to earth. But now they call me and they'll say, what were you talking about? Because obviously we've lost the culture and we need to get it back. This is why culture matters so much. It's why the arts matter so much. It's also why the way we live matters so much. Like if you're cheating on your wife, that's part of the culture too. If you're abandoning your children, that's part of the culture too. The culture of divorce has been an absolute disaster. I keep saying to people, Jesus never mentioned homosexuality, but he said a lot about divorce, and he said, don't do it. That is the thing he said. Yeah. And that blows up children's worlds. And when I talk to young people, I can almost always tell which one of them come from divorced families, because they're lost. Their planet blew up. The planet they were living on exploded, and no one has taught them how to walk on the ground again. It's all about the culture, and I think we do ourselves a disservice when we forget that, because we think we can fix it fast through politics, and we can't.
Yeah. So how do you think the right can reformat their messaging to frame it on the grounds of compassion rather than logic? Because this, I think, is the right's. I think that's genuinely the right's great failing, and I think it's their great challenge for the new century is say, look, actually, we are coming from the heart. How can they do that?
Well, I think we're going to have to accept the notion of hierarchy, and this is a very hard thing because the left has demonized hierarchy. They say, you say that a heterosexual relationship. The word hierarchy means the judgment of the sacred. It doesn't mean something's better than something else. It means things are closer to the center, essentially.
Sorry to interrupt there. Yeah. I've been thinking about this, and I was thinking actually we could reframe hierarchy in terms of belonging, right? Where something belongs. And because I think belonging, again, for lost young people, that might actually have been an attractive force. It's like, look, you belong in a relationship together. This, the hierarchy will sort itself out. My wife is, I flatter myself to think that I'm the head of my household, but we definitely belong in the same relationship, so, right, sorry, Karen.
Well, I mean, I think that was a good example, though, in a relationship. I consider myself the head of my household, too, but because my wife's happiness is all in all to me, if you look at our lives, She has gotten all the things that she wanted out of life, while bringing me dinner. It's an amazing thing that she has kept her priorities in order, and I have kept her priorities in my heart, and that actually works really well. But what the left always says is you're being unequal. You're saying that it is better to be a straight couple than to be a gay couple. And I will absolutely say that it is more closer to the center of human life to be a straight couple than to be a gay couple. But the world doesn't need everything to be at the center. I think it's more at the center of human life to be a garbage collector than it is to be a concert violinist. But we can't live without the garbage collector, but we wouldn't want to live without the concert violinist. So there are many beautiful things that aren't at the center, but we have to maintain the center. It's really interesting. All my life, I've always thought that I serve the ordinary person. I'm an artist, which makes me weird. It makes me elite. It makes me kind of offbeat. But I'm here to entertain the person who does the things that are necessary to be done. And a lot of artists basically act as if those little people don't matter. If they don't understand their art, then that's their fault. They must be racist. They must be sexist. They must be some kind of phobic. Well, no, it's your job to entertain them. They're paying your salary, so you should entertain them. Those are all things about being at the center and being at the outside. An artist is at the outside of society, but that doesn't mean he can't be part of society, and a beautiful part of society. Those are the ways we have to talk. We can't adopt the language of the left because they're so good at polluting the language and lying. And as you say, it's amazing how compassionate they sound until you disagree with them. And then suddenly you're dealing with the till of the hun.
Yeah, you've never met people so cruel as a leftist
God.
dealing with a black Thomas Sowell fan. I've never seen any, and it's cruelty. It's genuine malice. And I mean, I've never treated anyone in my life with the kind of venom that I see coming out of leftists who feel that they're dealing with essentially class traitors, race traitors. It's just like, whew. But I love the way you're framing this, because I've been thinking about this a lot as well. The right needs to essentially capture aesthetic language, talking in terms of beauty, and cruelty. You can, this sort of framing. The left is actually completely off their guard on these. And like you're saying, a brilliant way of framing it, by the way. The center is the normal area, but all the beautiful things are on the margins a lot of the time. And that's innately flattering to those people who feel themselves marginalized. So it's very persuasive. You can see how you can generate a sense of sort of noblesse oblige within the progressive elite. Actually, maybe these people aren't so bad. Maybe you should see yourself as a bit higher than them in a hierarchy, rather than trying to see. Because one of the things I was studying Nietzsche not so long ago, and he's got this great point where he's like, look, it's immoral to argue that the lamb should be like the hawk, but it's also immoral to say the hawk should be like the lamb. And so we've got to accept that there is a distinction here, and it's not wrong for them to be the things that they are. And that's what I think we do need to make the progressives understand. It's like, actually, you're something beyond their understanding, right?
Yeah, I think that to say that people are in different places in a society is in no way to devalue them at all. And essentially, and this is the important thing, it is true that each of us is this, important thing. And that is true of even the people who are useless to society in some sense, like the homeless guy or the schizophrenic or the person who's ill and has to be taken care of. We do remember that this is the basis of the faith that founded the West, that we are here to respond to that person in his moment of need. But that doesn't mean that we are here to discount the good that people do for society and the tension between the individual and society. That's another thing. It's kind of an interesting, it's because Marx polluted Hegel that we have forgotten that idea of tension and resolution is at the core of life. So when somebody says, and how often have I heard this? Some guy says to me, oh, I've turned 45. I've got to leave my wife for this 20-year-old girl so that I can be myself. You say, well, actually, no, actually, no. Part of who you are is married to this woman who has taken care of you all this time. And so you actually have to not do that in order to be yourself. You have to restrain yourself from what your flesh desires and be something else. those tensions are part of life, and they're an actual creative and beautiful and extremely painful sometimes part of life. And what the left wants to do always is side on one side, and they think that they're giving you something. You think they're giving you something. You think, oh, I'm giving you the freedom to sleep with anybody you want. But then if she happens to get pregnant, you have to kill that person, and now you feel bad about that, and so now you have to support killing people, and now suddenly you're killing a baby 10 seconds before it's born, and that's who you become, and now you need the government to take care of you because you have no money because you're allowed. And so they're really selling you slavery all the time. They're always selling you slavery with a happy face.
Yeah, one of the reasons I decided that I was going to start calling myself a conservative was because it was so evident that everything, even slightly left-wing at this point, I view as a poison chalice. It might taste good on the lips, but it's going to kill you. Whereas the right has a completely different approach. It says, well, actually, this is going to be a bit rough. You're not going to enjoy this. But, you know, in a year's time, in 10 years' time, you're going to be a better person. And I mean, I don't know whether you know, but I've lost quite a lot of weight since becoming a conservative. You know, I set up this office about half an hour bike ride from my house. So every day I have to ride my bike back and forth, and I do it fastidiously. And I feel so good. I just feel so much better.
It is amazing, and it's a true emotionally too. You know, that if you take care of the spiritual part of your life, if you take care of the inner man, you suddenly, you know, and that takes time. It takes time away from work. It takes time away from making money. It takes time away from all kinds of things, but it's just worth it for that life. And of course, you're taking responsibility for yourself, which is an amazing thing to do. You know?
Which is, and this is one of the bits that Jordan Peterson always says: look, treat yourself like someone you were responsible for. Because a lot of the time, I didn't. I never used to. And I always thought, well, you know, who cares about me? Well, actually, all of the people who love me care about me and would like me to take care of myself for them. But I realize we're coming up on time, which is a real shame. So this has been a brilliant conversation. I really enjoyed this.
It's a real pleasure to meet you, actually.
No, I'm such a huge fan. So the final question I'd like to ask is, what does success look like for the right? Like when the right can say we've won, how do we know?
Well, of course, the battle never ends. I mean, there are always people who want power, and what you're facing is the fact that when you remove the religious aspect from life, there are really only two solutions. There's the Nietzschean solution, where the most powerful person sets the rules. And a lot of people say that's not what Nietzsche believed, but I think it's the actual end of his philosophy. And there's the communist, the Marxist solution, where essentially some magical state takes care of everything. And so, you know, there's always going to be that fight. There's always going to be people who want the power. And so for the right, the victory for the moment looks like a commitment to limited government. It looks like, you know, if I could only use one sentence, that would be it. Because in that commitment to limited government is implied the life of the family. It's implied the governing of oneself, which takes place within the family. It can't take place anywhere else, really. If you're going to have individual life, you're going to need families to create the little governments that then build into bigger governments that have hopefully less and less power as they get further away. So for, you know, all the ancillary nonsense that the right gets into, when they get into matters of race, when they get into matters of population and this and that, I think they could just get rid of all of that if they said the government is not going to be allowed to interfere with your individual choices. And in order to maintain that, this is the cultural side of that argument, you are going to have to live a moral life. You are going to have to live a moral life, or you will become a slave. And the government is not going to let you become a slave because we're not going to let it. We're going to stop it. What happens in the West, what happens in freedom every single time, and it has happened, and you know, Aristotle and Plato write about this. I mean, it's when you restrict government, you thrive. When you kill the king and you let people be free, you thrive. When you thrive, you begin to think that government is decent because you've limited governments and government has been forced to act decently. You start giving government more and more power because you think they're going to be decent. And then you find out, no, it was always a starving dragon. And now you've fed the dragon and they're going to take over again. That's the point we're at right now. We think the Western governments are good because we forced them to be good, but they're the same old sons of bitches they always were. And they are going to take that power back. And now they're going to try and do it at a global level. For the right, the answer looks like forcing government to do less, asking people to do more with their own lives.
Andrew, thank you so much for joining me. This has been really great. And I would love to have you back on sometime. This would be really good.
Oh, it'd be a pleasure. I've been really enjoyed talking to you, and I'm happy to do it again.
Thanks so much.